Good morning. Aloha. Thank you so much for coming today. I know a little bit about Tulsi, so I'm going to introduce her today. I've known her for 35 years. She is my older sister. But first, I just want to say thank you. So I'm going to make this quick because you came to hear her, not me. But thank you so much for spending your time here today. I know you guys have a lot of people to choose from for this election. And I would ask that when you're listening, yes, listen to what they say, but look at what they've done. Look at their careers, and when they've come to a crossroads of what is good for them in their political career and is what is good for the people, what did they choose? And I can tell you from experience, her entire life, she has chosen you. She has chosen to fight for the people and fight for the planet every single time. So speaking of the planet, the environment is something that has been very near and dear to her heart, and something that growing up in Hawaii, it's what got her into politics to begin with. This kind of path that she's been on was not one that any of us in the family would have imagined. So growing up, she's two and a half years older than me, and growing up, she was extremely shy, naturally an introvert. When we were little, it was always me that was running around and being obnoxious, and she was always the older, responsible sister. When we were going to the store, I would talk to the store clerks for her because she was incredibly shy. And how does someone like that take a path where going from the state house when she was 21 to city council to US Congress to now running for president? How does that happen? It happens because she is so passionate about making a difference and a positive impact. So it started with the environment. So when she was 16 years old, she started a nonprofit called Healthy Hawaii Coalition, where she went into schools and taught kids, elementary school kids, about protecting the environment. She was water woman. She would go up and do a skit as water woman. And then there was a situation where, and just briefly, where they wanted to build a landfill on top of a water aquifer. This was a little bit later. She got all the signatures, and this really was the beginning of her activism and what led her to run for the state house when she was 21. For someone who's shy, even for someone who's an extrovert, going door to door and canvassing is not always like a fun thing. Like, you don't know who's going to open the other, that door and how they're going to respond. But for someone who is incredibly shy, it's hard, it's difficult. And what drove her then and got her past that was, it's not about me. I'm fighting for them. I'm fighting for the people, and I'm fighting for the planet. And that's what got her out of the car and up to knock on that door every single time. There are so many examples, and politicians can tell you that they have all of these plans. They can tell you what they're going to do. How do you believe them? You look at what they've done and the decisions that they've made. Another example of choosing people over fighting for you over her political career, she was in the state house when she was 21. Her unit, she was in the National Guard, her unit got deployed, and she stepped down from her position voluntarily to deploy to the Middle East. If it was about herself and her career, that is not something she would have ever done. In 2016, she was the vice chair of the DNC. She stepped down from that position to support Bernie Sanders because of her concern about the direction that we were going in foreign policy and what was happening in the DNC. And so time and time again, you will see that she does not do what is politically good for her. She fights for you every single time. And I will let her come up here and talk about the policy and her vision. But just to give you a little bit of insight from my end of who she is, where her heart is, and it's really about serving you. So I'll let her get up here. Please welcome my sister, future President of the United States, Tulsi Gabbard.
Give my sister some love, please. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here this morning. How are you? Good. Start our morning with aloha. Aloha. There we go. It's great to be back here in New Hampshire, just driving here. We got in very, very late last night. We had a very long layover and a lot of delays in the plane getting here. But to wake up and get in the car this morning and to see the colors of the leaves starting to turn, it is not too cold yet, so it's great to be back. There's a lot going on. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to be able to, hey, Chris, how are you? Nice to see you. I want to be able to hear what's on your mind and answer your questions, so I'll be relatively brief with my remarks, but I want to begin with just a recognition of where we are as a country right now. Where if you watch cable news every day, which can be hard to do sometimes, or if you're only looking at the if you're only looking at the headlines, if you are scrolling through Twitter, it's easy to get disheartened about really how divisive the rhetoric is and how so much of our country is being torn apart, whether it be on political lines, on racial lines, religious lines, all of these different things that really make our country diverse are instead being used to drive wedges between us, to tear us apart. And the thing that I love most about what we are doing on this campaign is the time that I get to spend in rooms like this, with people like you and communities all across the country, in big cities and small towns and, East Coast, West Coast, the middle of the country, the South. We, the American people, are what make this country great. And I find myself so filled with hope and inspired by these conversations we're having, because in spite of what you hear happening in Washington, what we see is that it is a bubble that is disconnected from the reality of the everyday lives, challenges, and hopes that we have in communities all across this country. And I think that's what is at the heart of the kind of change that we together are seeking to bring about, we, the American people. Recognizing how disconnected Washington is and how our government for too long has been one that is more interested in serving itself or serving the rich and powerful, serving those who can afford to pay for the high-powered lobbyists to advocate for their interests, to the detriment of the interests of the people. And it is we, the people, who suffer the consequences as a result. So rather than having leaders who are truly motivated by a desire to serve, truly motivated by a desire to bring to fruition the vision that our founders had for us of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, instead, they're more interested in who's going to win the next election, which political party can maintain the most power, how do you get the most attention, how do you get the most influence, how do you make the most money, and we, the people, suffer as a result. Our campaign is about bringing about real systemic change to lead a country that is based on this culture of leadership, of service, putting people ahead of profits, putting people ahead of politics, thinking about each and every one of the challenges we face, the solutions and ideas that we bring forward, and the policies that come from those ideas within the context of what's in the best interest of the people of our country and how can we best protect our planet. It's very simple when you look at it within that framework, And you get away from all this stuff about, well, if we do this, that's going to help Republicans win, or if you're Republicans, this is going to help Democrats win, so we can't make things look good for them because then it'll hurt us, and all of these other political calculations that get in the way of actually getting things done for people. This is at the heart of what needs to change. This is something that when I first got elected in Washington became abundantly clear, where in 2012 there were 84 new members of Congress elected. I was one of 50 Democrats, and there were 34 Republicans. And for the first week or so as new members of Congress, every election this happens, as new members, you get together and you go through this orientation. They give you the keys to your office and tell you where the committee rooms are, all the paperwork you got to fill out, all this stuff. And we're all together, we're getting to know each other, which is a good thing, because we're going to have to work together. But very, very quickly, about a week in, Republicans go here, Democrats go here, and that is the beginning of this hyper-partisan separation that occurs. And each of us respectively told by leaders within our parties, well, if it's a Republican bill, you probably don't want to support it. If your a Republican colleague is asking for your help to introduce a bill, you probably don't want to do that because we want to beat them in the next election, and vice versa. My Republican friends are being told the same thing. Putting the interests of politics and elections and politicians ahead of the interests of the people, saying, hey, here's a challenge related to healthcare. There were issues related to the Affordable Care Act that we had bipartisan support that we wanted to help fix. Recognizing that this legislation did a lot of good, but there were still a lot of problems with it that we could use to try to improve our healthcare system. And we got, hey, Republican and Democrat, let's introduce this legislation. There was opposition from leaders in both parties from actually bringing forward this legislation, from Republicans saying, well, we don't want to improve the Affordable Care Act because we want to defeat it. We want to use it as a political talking point against Obamacare. And if it's better, then it's harder to argue against it. And on the Democrat side, we had leaders saying, well, this Affordable Care Act is one of our champion accomplishments, and we don't want to acknowledge that there's anything wrong with it. And so on both sides, putting their politics ahead of the interests of the people. This is what is at the heart of what needs to change. And it begins with leadership. What kind of leadership are we setting? What kind of culture of leadership are we setting? As an example, yes, for leaders in Washington, but for the kinds of dialogue and discourse that we need in our country as well. There are too many people who I hear from who say, well, I haven't spoken to my uncle in months or years because he voted for Donald Trump, or vice versa. I think, well, I don't talk to my daughter anymore because we disagree on political issues. Families being separated, friends breaking up their friendships because of politics, rather than coming together on these incredible founding ideals of our country, the bedrock of who we are as Americans, the freedoms that I think sometimes we take for granted, our freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, our freedoms and liberties that are enshrined within our Constitution. This is one reason why at all of our campaign events, wherever we are, at the table, I don't know if you noticed, we have a copy of a pocket-sized copy of the Constitution. You got one? You got one? All right. Because it's important for us to remember what unites us and what binds us together as Americans. Because once we do that, we can treat each other with aloha, with respect, with care, and be motivated by this love that we have for our country, for each other, for our freedoms and our future, that lays that foundation to be able to work together, to be able to have civil discourse, to talk through different issues and say, hey, you and I might have very different ideas on how best to reform the healthcare system. But if I'm listening to you and you're able to listen to me and we can have a discussion about it, we can move forward towards reaching the objective that I believe we all share, which is that no American should be left without getting the health care that they need because they don't have enough money in their pocket. No one should be left to die or to fall sick without getting that care they need because they don't make enough money. When we have this kind of discourse, taking away the buzzwords and the hyper-partisanship, we can come together around how we can best protect our environment. You know, climate change has unfortunately become a really divisive term. Just the term itself. Maybe this is more in Washington than in other places, but you talk about climate change and you'll have people going to one side of the room or the other side of the room, not standing together and saying, okay, what is it necessary for all of us as people to live? Clean water. Let's start there. We cannot survive without clean water. Clean air, something essential to every one of us. You know, each of us comes from different places, homes that we love and appreciate. We want to make sure we preserve our environment, that we have a safe home, not just for us, but for our kids, and their kids to come. This is what we're talking about. If you want to call it climate change or call it something else, but we're talking about the necessities that each of us has as people and how we must protect these precious resources that allow us to live and survive here on this planet. We begin our conversation there, then we can start talking about what are the kinds of policy changes that we need to make in order to accomplish that. What are some of the different changes and decisions that we can make in our own personal lives, in our own small ways to be able to protect our homes, our communities, our planet? Then we're talking about progress. Then we are able to make progress. Then we're able to look at the partnerships that we need to have with other countries, recognizing that the threats that we face are not isolated to us here in the United States, nor can we solve them by ourselves. This requires a foreign policy, working with other countries based on cooperation rather than conflict, recognizing that whether we're talking about China or India or Russia or other countries, there will be areas of difference that we'll need to work out and work on through negotiations. But there are areas of shared and common interest that if we are coming with this attitude of cooperation rather than conflict, we can work together to address climate change. We can and we must work together to de-escalate these tensions we are currently facing between the United States and other nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, to walk us back from this new Cold War and the brink of nuclear annihilation that we're currently facing with these increasing tensions and this nuclear arms race. We cannot accomplish these things unless we, the United States, we are leading with this foreign policy that is based on cooperation, that is based on seeking out how can we maximize these areas of shared interest while also being able to work out the differences that we have. When you look at so many of these different issues that we're facing, we can get to the root cause of these problems and begin to solve them by putting people ahead of politics, putting people ahead of these special interest corporations who are only looking out for their profits, putting the well-being of our people and our planet above all else. This is at the heart of why I'm running for president, to bring about this change, bringing these ideals of service above self to the presidency, to restore the values of integrity and honor and respect to our White House so that it can once again be that beacon of light and hope and opportunity that represents who we are as Americans, the freedoms that we cherish, and the work that we must do together as we strive towards that more perfect union. Thank you. Yes, on that note, we will open it up to questions. Yes, ma'am. She's got a microphone for you so everybody can hear you.
First, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a Massachusetts person, but I appreciate the fact that politicians come out to New Hampshire. I wish they would go to all the states, because some of us have felt deprived for years living in states that weren't one of the first three. Secondly, you said something that struck perfectly, I don't want to be too close to that, perfectly, and that's that too many times the politicians listen to only people who give them money. So I have actually written incremental policies. I'm not solving world hunger, and I'm sharing them with all legislators and presidential candidates who will take them. because I'd like to give this to you.
Absolutely.
But I am also fully aware that your campaign policy team cannot talk to your legislative team.
Correct.
So I have 2 little cards
You are
here
on it.
with
I love
links.
it.
So
I know,
whichever
right?
you choose.
Okay.
And I don't solve world hunger, but I try and improve identity theft and income inequality and some tax issues. And I'm an enrolled agent, so I'm a tax professional.
Fantastic.
And I have a few more of those cards if any of you guys want to read them.
Thank you. This is awesome. Thank you. Practical ideas on how to solve these practical problems. Thank you very much. I know, right? She's ready. And you're Beth, right? Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much. This is what I'm talking about. We're getting stuff done here. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So they're not doing 2 nights for the debates, which is not an accident. So I would kind of like to know, how are you going to get yourself out there? Because they're definitely putting you on the end. You're not going to get a prime spot. You deserve one. We can all agree on that.
Yeah.
Who are you taking out next? So, and how are you doing it?
Hey, man, I'm about peace, love, and aloha. I don't know what you're talking about. Look, these debates are, they're a good platform to get in front of millions of people across the country, to increase name recognition, to let people know who I am. But the impact is limited given some of the things you've pointed out. That we still don't know even how long the debate will be or what the format will be, and then those things we're waiting to get those details. But regardless, what we've seen is that each candidate may be getting somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes of time to cover responses to a whole host of different issues. I don't know, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like you're walking away from watching these debates more informed? You've stopped watching them. I agree. What you're talking about is a longer form conversation to be able to actually help you as voters be better informed about my position on different issues and the different approaches we would take to solve these challenges, right? I think that's one of the biggest challenges here with the formats that exist. Is it's not actually helping increase the information and awareness for voters. But saying that, again, it's a great opportunity. I'm going to do my best to maximize whatever time I am given to be able to present my vision and the kind of leadership that I seek to bring and the kind of change that I hope to bring about. And that leadership is a unifying leadership. What we're talking about here, to not dive into, and someone asked me this yesterday in Iowa saying, Tulsi, you talk a lot about bringing our country together. What we've talked about here today, this is what I share everywhere I go, but isn't that going to hurt you in a primary election where it'll help you if you are more partisan and you're only speaking to one small segment of people? And my response to this reporter was just, that's exactly the problem. It's exactly the problem. When you have politicians on both sides who, when it's politically advantageous, will say one thing to one group of people, but then when they have to speak to more people, then they'll completely change their tune and start saying other things that they think will help them get more votes. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of those kinds of politicians who will say and do whatever they have to just to get elected. And what I find, and I find this amongst a lot of my friends, that's why a lot of them stay home. They don't even vote. I'm asking for the privilege and the opportunity to be able to serve you as your president and commander-in-chief because I care very much for our country. I love our country. Hawaii is a beautiful place. It would be very easy to just stay home and go surfing every day and close my eyes off to the world, but I can't do that. I can't do that, and I won't. And this is why I'm here, and this is why I'm asking for your support, because there is so much at stake. There is so much at stake. This is about something bigger than defeating Donald Trump in 2020. It's about getting to a place where we as a country are coming together to actually turn things inside out and get to the root of the problems that we've been facing for far too long. We can only do that together. Yes, in the pink jacket. Okay. All right. Oh, okay.
Thank you. I am the widow of a 100% service-connected, disabled, Purple Heart Bronze Star veteran, Vietnam era. And when our veterans become ill, if they're at home, most members of the military, except for Vietnam veterans, the caretaker gets a stipend. The caretakers for Vietnam veterans are not entitled to a stipend. Additionally, when it's service-connected disability, the veteran gets a pension from the VA. When that veteran passes, the pension was cut to 1/5, which is what the government expects me to live on. So I'd like to know, hopefully you can make it right when it comes to Vietnam veterans, and also with the families of veterans, to make sure that the sacrifices we make are recognized and supported. And as a side note, do something about the burn pits that are still going on.
Yes.
I don't know if everybody's aware of it, but burn pits were outlawed. And so what the government did was hire other companies to come in that were not military to continue burning these toxic substances and poisoning our servicemen and women. So thank you.
Thank you. What was your name again?
Jetta.
Jetta. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing, the challenges of you and your family's own situation and hardship, and thanks to not only your husband but your family for your service over the years. There are so many ways that our Vietnam veterans have been left behind, and you're talking about one very specific one where for the post 9/11 generation of veterans, where thankfully we have more of our men and women in uniform surviving combat, but because of technology and body armor and all these things, but also what comes with that is we have more folks coming home with loss of limbs and more both visible and invisible injuries. And as you know, as a result, Congress made it so that a spouse or a loved one who is the caregiver would be able to get some kind of compensation to be able to be that primary caregiver, but leaving behind those like yourselves in your situation who had served in previous conflicts out of that equation, which has been a problem with a lot of the improvements that have been made through the VA and the benefits and services, is that it has segmented different generations of veterans, which is absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. No matter what generation we have served, no matter how that service came about, that sacrifice must be honored, and the VA must fulfill its mandate to take care of not only our veterans, but our veterans' families as well. So you can be guaranteed that as president, as a fellow veteran, I know and understand these issues in better and in a much more personal way than a lot of folks in Washington do. And I take those warrior ethos that are ingrained in all of us who have served to heart. When we say, I will never leave a fallen comrade, I will never leave a fallen comrade. On the burn pits issue, and I'm glad you brought this up because this is one where those who served in Vietnam actually have a lot in common with our post 9/11 generation of veterans, where Vietnam veterans for decades after exposure to Agent Orange were fighting to get that exposure recognized by the VA, to get the care that they needed because of the illnesses and the cancers and other things that came about because of Agent Orange. And time again, they were told by the VA, well, there's just no proof that it's connected to your service. It is heart-wrenching to hear from these veterans, many of whom have already passed because of these cancers, how they fought and fought and fought for care from the VA only to be rejected because of bureaucracy, essentially, and people who are unwilling to recognize what was actually happening. And that's what's happening right now with burn pit exposure. I was deployed to Iraq in 2005. We were at a very, very large camp that had, soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen all there, coasties as well. We had NATO forces there as well. There were thousands of people on this camp. And as a result, there was a lot more waste. And as a result, our burn pit every day that ran 24 hours a day was massive. It was massive. And it created this huge dark cloud of like smog and toxins and stuff that was constantly over our camp. There was no blue sky, really, right, Chris? I served with Chris there on that deployment. And anytime any one of us got a cold or got sick, it quickly turned into something we called the crud, because it just turned into this hacking cough that just didn't seem to go away. This has then, over the years since many of us have come home, not just from one deployment, but multiple deployments, has turned into a lot of very rare, unique cancers that are impacting service members in 30s and 40 years old. Different kinds of bronchial illnesses, all of these things. Long story short is to say these veterans are going to the VA saying this is a service-connected problem and we need help to fix it. And the VA is once again using that same excuse to say, well, where's the proof? Where is the proof? So this is something we are actively fighting to change in Congress now, because burn pits are the Agent Orange of our generation, and we cannot allow another generation of veterans to fall victim to the VA's failures.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Sarah, and I'm wondering how you're going to be inclusive of Indigenous people and people of color in climate change solutions, especially considering they're the ones most heavily impacted and impacted first by climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This is a great question. This is something that I've addressed in legislation I've introduced in Congress called the Off Fossil Fuels Act. We took a very focused approach to making sure that as we were crafting this legislation, it was inclusive of those who have been most negatively impacted, especially in communities where these industries exist and where these jobs exist. So as we're looking at this transition off of fossil fuels towards renewable energy, yes, we're talking about ending the nearly $30 billion of taxpayer subsidies we are paying towards these big fossil fuel companies who are raking in massive profits, and redirecting those resources towards investing in clean renewable energy, in infrastructure, in workforce and job training, and in righting the wrongs for those communities who have been dealing with the brunt of the negative impacts of our dependence on fossil fuels without any notice or acknowledgement for so long. This has to be part of the larger approach that we are taking as we make this transition, knowing that it's bigger than just about going from one energy source to another, but it's about all the people who've been left behind and making sure that we are all moving forward together. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right. That's an important one, though. It's not a small one. Yes. That's an interesting idea. I want to look into that more. I believe that there are already different branches of the government that should be focused on that. I didn't know until I was a member of Congress that NOAA, for example, has a uniformed service within NOAA, the National Ocean and Atmospheric Agency. So they're focused primarily on the oceans and maritime protection. But I think your point is well taken, that there can be like a service response force designated to be able to go and take care of a lot of these environmental threats. We'll close on your question. It's a very important one that is a central point of my campaign. As I mentioned, the most important responsibility the president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. And we can see how where we are now points to why that is so important, why that's so true. where President Trump is pushing us now closer and closer to the brink of yet another disastrous war in the Middle East with Iran. And it began when he pulled out from the Iran nuclear agreement, even though Iran was still in compliance. It was escalated when he increased economic sanctions that are crippling and really having the most detrimental impact on the Iranian people, on the people there who are suffering. It escalated when his administration designated Iran's military as a terrorist organization, just like ISIS, something that no country has ever done to any other sovereign nation's military before in history. And it continues to escalate every time Trump announces another wave of our troops being sent to places like Saudi Arabia. His recent announcement is only the most recent. There have been one or two other announcements of deployments prior to this. All of this is to put us in a position where not only are our troops in Saudi Arabia to protect Saudi interests, not the interests of the United States, but pushing us into this war with Iran that would be far more costly and disastrous than anything that we saw with the war in Iraq. You talk about veterans, you talk about burn pit exposure, you talk about the many, many years of ramifications of a war that was completely unnecessary. It was a war of choice that undermined our national security, that was tremendously costly in American lives, that cost the people in the countries where we waged these wars, like Iraq and Libya, and still ongoing in Syria, pain and suffering, increasing refugee crisis. So you look at the impacts and the costs of all of these different wars, and then you look at Iran. Iran is a much larger country. Their military is far stronger than anything we saw in Iraq. A war there would not be confined to a conventional war within the boundaries of the country. It would take unconventional tactics, and it would go across the region and present a brand new threat to us here in the United States. So this is the problem with the kind of leadership that is coming from this administration. But it's a problem that has extended across previous administrations, both Democrat and Republican, with leaders who are waging these wasteful, counterproductive wars, going and overthrowing authoritarian dictators in other countries, and then spending money to nation build in these countries to the tune of over $6 trillion, our taxpayer dollars, since 9/11 alone. All of these wars having nothing to do with our national security or keeping the American people safe, and in fact, undermining that security. As President and Commander-in-Chief, I will end these wasteful regime change wars, make sure we're not starting any new ones, work to de-escalate tensions with nuclear-armed countries so that we can end this new Cold War and arms race, and instead redirect our taxpayer dollars from where they would have been spent if we continue down this road, and use them to actually serve the needs of our people right here at home. This requires strong leadership. This requires strong leadership and experience and understanding. And that's what's unique about what I'm offering and what I can bring to this job is the experience that I've had personally as a soldier serving over 16 years in the Army National Guard, serving on both of those Middle East deployments, working in Congress now for nearly 7 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, understanding the importance of our national security, and being able to walk into the Oval Office on day one prepared to do that job, making sure that one of the first things that we do is bring our troops home from Afghanistan. Now, there is no reason for them to continue to be there. If there are threats coming from a new Al-Qaeda cell popping up, then we can launch a quick special forces deployment, go in, defeat that threat, and bring our troops home. We've got to put the interests of the American people and our country first, and that's exactly what I'll do as your president. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for making the time to come today. It's so great to be here with all of you.